Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football, whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP. We got you covered all year long. All right. My next guest is someone I've been excited to get on here. She's a budding star in the fantasy community, co-host of the Dynasty Vipers podcast, Tera Roberts. Tera, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I'm excited to have you. We're excited to talk about, I'm sure you're excited to talk about your Green Bay Packers.
Yes.
You are a Packers fan from the South, as your Twitter handles or your Twitter bio says. Green Bay 2020 in the second year under Matt LaFleur repeated their 13-3 record. But this year seemed like the real thing as opposed to last year. We saw a lot of like rumors that Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur didn't get along versus 2020, where it seemed like they were on the same page and Aaron Rodgers was really taking to the coaching. And so, it felt like a different 13-3, at least from, the outside looking in. But unfortunately, both end in similar fashion, a loss in the NFC Championship game. So as we gear up for 2021, Rodgers, who's coming off an MVP season, his future is in doubt for, as regards to him being a Green Bay Packer. Tera, how are things looking in Packerland as we near the 2021 season?
So from my perspective, so I'm going to speak assuming, I guess we'll talk about Rodgers in a little bit, but I'm going to speak assuming that Rodgers is with us in 2021 from the get-go. I think the outlook is great, honestly. As you said, they're moving along with LaFleur very well. Things are clicking on off cylinders. And in terms of the way that they approached the draft, I actually think that the way they addressed it was perfect. I mean, they took care of all the gaps that we have. They went out and got Eric Stokes, and, defensively, that's something that we really need. He can play well with maybe across from Jair Alexander. And, we had a lot of losses at the offensive line, address that in the draft. Then the big carrot of wide receiver with Amari Rodgers, who fits perfectly into that slot role that we desperately need. So overall, I feel really good about it. I see no reason that we won't repeat the record, with one game difference. So maybe 14-3. The lowest I would see it maybe is 13-4. Definitely see us winning the NFC North. And I think that the changes that they made can make us competitive to maybe make that next jump to compete with Tampa.
Yeah, I mean, if assuming Rodgers comes back, you have to assume that Green Bay is going to be in the running for not just a divisional championship, but a Super Bowl, like you said. So again, I'm kind of in that realm where I'm like, I'm not too sure. I'm kind of teeter-tottering. I won't be surprised if either one of those things happen. But like we talked about, Aaron Rodgers, he's the main sticking point, it seems, for the Packers and in regards to how the 2021 season is going to play out. And so, like I mentioned before, coming off that MVP season, one in which he completed over 71 or almost 71% of his passes, shade under 4,300 yards, 48 passing touchdowns to just 5 interceptions, was second in total fantasy points, averaging 24 points per game. But now we come to wonder, again, you say you're on the side of where you think he's coming back. We do have to wonder, though, has he played his last game in a Packers uniform? He's going off the board as the QB8 right now. Tera, how are you approaching Rodgers in your fantasy leagues this year?
So to address whether or not he's going to play, in my opinion, it's just not a reality for me that the Packers are going to trade him. So the only options really are that he just goes ahead and retires, or, after a while they work things out. Maybe there's some kind of contract extension, some kind of praising of Rodgers that gets him back in their good graces, or gets themselves back in his good graces. But I do think that he's more than likely going to play in 2021. And if not, and here's the big risk, if not, it's not going to be a trade situation. If not, he's going to sit out. So that's something to definitely keep in mind when you're approaching redraft, is that, it's a risk. It's a risk. So when you're taking him because of this drama in this situation, as you mentioned, his ADP, you can get him at a very good value if you want to take that risk. You're looking at someone who can be the QB1, arguably, at the very least top 5, and you don't have to draft him in that position because of the drama that's going on. So, in terms of redraft, if you want to take that risk, get him and get great value out of that, and then kind of like, as you get into later rounds, make sure that you secure yourself with another quarterback who is going to be there and be dependable. I would take that approach. From a dynasty perspective, I would not be shying away from him. Age is a concern, but really, again, he's still a top prospect that you can get at a good value.
Yeah, no, Aaron Rodgers definitely can be a value. Again, like I said, I've just been on that safe side, especially, when you look at the guys that he's going around, like Russell Wilson or Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Ryan Tannehill. Some of those guys have, that rushing upside. So I probably would have been looking to them almost anyway, just because of that floor. But again, this is a guy that has the QB1 upside, like we saw last year, like you had alluded to, or you had just said. So definitely not going to sleep on Rodgers from that perspective. But another guy who I think, regardless of kind of how this plays out, I think his role is kind of solidified, and that's Aaron Jones. He was the RB5 in PPR points per game last year, 18 and a half PPR points in just 13 games. He set a career high in rushing yards, just over 1,100 yards, scored 9 touchdowns after scoring 16 the year before, but he remained a staple in the pass game, saw over 60 targets each of the last 2 years. And I say we as fantasy managers, we always cry about hashtag free Aaron Jones. Well, we don't have to worry about Jamal Williams to steal those opportunities anymore. Instead we have Quadzilla himself, AJ Dillon, who should have a role, but unlike Williams, shouldn't be in on these passing downs. So maybe that's a bump there for Aaron Jones. But anyway, according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP, Aaron Jones has an ADP of the RB10. Tara, is there any good reason to forgo Aaron Jones at this price, or are we all in on him?
I'm 100% with you. The possibility of Aaron Rodgers not being there doesn't scare me off of Aaron Jones. So from my perspective, he is one of the most, if not the most underrated running back in the game right now. And he has the ability to literally carry your team to the playoffs by himself. So honestly, I don't think it's something to worry about because he's someone that is so efficient with his carries. When you look at what he's done in the past, even if you look at seeing maybe a touchdown regression that you saw last year in comparison to 2019, where he had 16 touchdowns in his breakout year, even with the regression, he was still fantastic. And, to be fair, there was a small injury issue as well last year. But from my perspective, he's still a top back. And as you mentioned, he's very involved in the pass game. He should see a lot more of that to maybe kind of counterbalance if AJ Dillon were to take a little bit of work at the at the goal line. But I don't think I would shy away from him at all. When you look at somebody who has legitimately been top 10 in all-purpose yards for the past 2 seasons, it's just not going to go away. He has a high average, 5.5 last year, high average in terms of his yards per reception. He's just really good at football all around. There's no weakness for him. And, when you look at AJ Dillon, I am still personally not from a redraft perspective, in on AJ Dillon, but from a dynasty perspective, I'm in on AJ Dillon, not from the perspective that he's going to take from Aaron Jones this year, just from the perspective that Aaron Jones's contract really isn't a 4-year contract. It's actually more of a 2-year contract. So there's still potential to be able to use AJ Dillon from the future. But like you mentioned, I don't think he's going to take a ton from Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is still going to be a top back in terms of where you're drafting him with your ADP. He's so much more valuable for that in terms of what he can provide for you. And even if Rodgers is not there, and there is a little bit of a little bit less potency with the offense, he's still got a lot of room to work with, and they probably just push a little bit more volume on the ground anyway. So it's not something to worry about for me.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I'm at, right? If Aaron Rodgers is back, then we don't have to. There's no conversation needed, right? Aaron Jones is probably a top 6, top 5 back in fantasy. But if you look at the world without Aaron Rodgers, I think we're looking at a situation, right? Like, why can't this be like the Saints every time they don't have Drew Brees, right? Like, where this offense just runs through Aaron Jones, aka the Alvin Kamara, AJ
Mm-hmm.
Dillon, aka the Latavius Murray, and then Devontae Adams, aka the Michael Thomas in this situation. So I think that there's a world here where, like you said, the volume of this run game goes up because Aaron Rodgers isn't there, and that benefits not just Aaron Jones, but also AJ Dillon. It's funny, it's interesting you brought him up because from a redraft perspective, I find myself with a lot more AJ Dillon than I think that I would have because I look at the role Jamal Williams had. That was a role where he was seeing 800 to 1,000 yards from scrimmage in each of the last 2 years. Then you also look at a situation where, yeah, AJ Dillon's probably not going to steal the reception work from Aaron Jones, but there's a possibility that he could steal some of that touchdown work from Aaron Jones. And then, like we talked about Aaron Jones, there's also say what you want, but he's yet to play a full season. I think he played a full season last year, but he does tend to get nicked up. And
Mm-hmm.
so AJ Dillon is one, he's the next man up, whereas last year we needed 2 injuries to happen for him to be the guy. It's only one now, and not saying I ever wish an injury on Aaron Jones, one of my favorite players. Like you said, he's underappreciated, underrated. I think, there's what Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones are the only ones that can do what those three do from a run the ball perspective, but also line up as a wide receiver and catch the football. And I don't think Aaron Jones gets enough credit for that because he really operates as the number 2 receiver sometimes in this Green Bay
Exactly.
Packers offense. So, you know what? I find myself into AJ Dillon a little bit, who seems to be in that Kareem Hunt range where he's got that just enough upside built in. He's going to have a role, but he's also got enough upside built in where he can really take over and be the guy if something happens to Aaron Jones.
Exactly. And you have to remember with Jamal Williams, there were weeks where he was viable as a flex play, depending on how deep your league was. But like in a 12-man league, you could feel comfortable sitting there if you're in a tough position saying, hey, if I'm in a tough position and I need somebody who I know is going to get work and can get me a certain number, you can put him in there. And there's no reason that AJ Dillon can't do that as well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position, and really starts with one guy, man. That's Devontae Adams. Had one of the best seasons by a wide receiver with the year he had in 2020. Adams was my pick for the wide receiver 1 heading into 2020, and he came through averaging 25.6 PPR points per game, turned 149 targets into 115 catches for 1,374 yards and a ridiculous 18 touchdowns, caught over 77% of passes thrown his way. All of this, by the way, was done in just 14 games. So imagine what he could have done in 16. Going off the board as the wide receiver 3, we talked about Aaron Rodgers, so I kind of guess I know what your feeling is here, but is there any hesitancy when it comes to drafting Adams in your redraft leagues this year?
Not for me, really. The volume is still going to be there regardless. Again, I feel comfortable that Rodgers is going to play, but from a redraft perspective, it doesn't scare me off of him. From a dynasty perspective, then yeah, sure. Not just from an Aaron Rodgers perspective, but from if Aaron Rodgers is in fact not there, then that does affect the contract, which this year coming up is Devontae's last year. So from that perspective, but from a redraft perspective, for sure, I'm not shying away from him. Like you were saying, I mean, the touchdowns were ridiculous when you factor in that he didn't actually play all 16 games. It's crazy. And, you can expect a bit of regression, but honestly, it's not going to be that much to where it's going to make a huge difference. You know, if you look at him and what he's done over the past 3 years, you can easily say for sure you feel comfortable that there's not going to be regression in yardage at all. You feel comfortable that he's going to be able to get you easily 1,200 plus. We've got an extra game, so you know that 1,300 is super attainable for him. I see no reason that he wouldn't repeat that again. When you look at his catch rate, when you look at the touchdowns, it all just makes sense. So even if there's a little bit of regression just because of how ridiculously awesome that was, and that maybe we, you know, are bringing in some more talent to catch the ball, then yeah, just a little bit, but that's not enough to back me off of him. I agree with you. He is wide receiver 1. I can make the argument for him to maybe bump down to 3, but no lower than that, regardless of whether or not Rodgers playing.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where, I mean, if Rodgers is here, he's my wide receiver 1 most likely. Maybe my wide receiver 2. I have to really look at Tyreek Hill in that situation, but anyway, you know, without Rodgers, I'm still not moving that much off of him. If Rodgers were to, you know, I don't want to wish this evil on you and Packers land, but if Rodgers were to say, hey, you know what? I'm not playing for Green Bay. They don't want to trade me. I'm going to sit this one out. And I mean, Devontae Adams, I think, would probably fall into the teens at that point in terms of ADP. Devontae Adams would. And so if I'm looking at that, I think I would still see that as a value because I don't see, like, just give me the Allen Robinson scenario, right? Because
For
this is
sure.
a guy that's going to get 140 to 150 plus targets. You know, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. He's good enough where he'll make do on those targets. And, you know, say what we want about Jordan Love. I mean, I have to ask you, Tara, if Jordan Love does come in, how concerned are you about this Packers offense potentially?
I'm concerned about the overall record, but the production of the offense, I don't think is going to take a huge hit.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of with you on that, right? Because I think as I was prepping for the show, and it's something that I've really had to think about in terms of the NFC North, because it's going to really reverberate across the division, right? It's not just doesn't affect the Packers, right? It's going to affect the
Mm-hmm.
Bears and the Vikings. Maybe not the Lions as much, but it will definitely affect these 3 teams and how they finish. And so it's something that I thought about when you think about this offense and you think about it's really quarterback friendly, and the fact that Aaron Rodgers was just so elite was you know, just shows you the production that he was able to have. But if Jordan Love can just be competent right at the quarterback
Mm-hmm.
position, I think that there isn't I don't think that this offense completely bottoms out. I think it could, like I said before, it can still support Devontae Adams. I think it can still support the running backs. You know, maybe we start having a conversation at Tunyon, and then you know, wide receiver 2, I think, is a conversation even with Aaron Rodgers. So you know, that being said, let's jump into the wide receiver 2. Something that was a pain for fantasy managers and presumably the Packers as well, trying to figure out who the wide receiver 2 was on this team on a week-to-week basis. We saw it be Allen Lazard and we saw it be MVS at different times. Lazard finishes the wide receiver 59 in PPR points per game with just under 10 points, 9.8. And then Marquez Valdez-Scantling, wide receiver 74 with just over 8.5 PPR points per game. The Packers also added third-round rookie Amari Rodgers, who you had talked about before, talented, rookie out of the University of Clemson. So is there anyone? Oh wow, I just made the Clemson Packers connection. Okay.
Yeah.
um, is there, you know, is there anyone here that could potentially make an impact in this Packers offense? You know, Allen Lazard going off the wide receiver 72, Rodgers the wide receiver 79, MVS the wide receiver 80. Are you interested in any of these guys?
So I will answer this, as you mentioned, I will be unbiased about it because I am in the unique position, which I'm super happy about, like the unique position of finally having one of my guys from my school in Clemson finally playing for the Packers. So this is awesome. So I'm really looking forward to it. But from a wide receiver 2 perspective, I think it'll be kind of similar last year, but a little bit different. So I don't think that there's going to be a clear wide receiver 2 for the entire season, because I believe that that position is destined for Amari Rodgers. But, even the best rookies don't step in immediately, making that impact that they ultimately will make right from the get-go. So, it was honestly a perfect landing spot for Amari Rodgers. We need a slot receiver, and he fits perfectly. So it's awesome for him because he doesn't have to battle anyone for that spot. That's his spot. So he gets to be able to immediately come into that role and make an impact. But again, even the best of rookies, you still have to have, a little bit of time to adjust to real game speed. Luckily, we should get some, maybe it'll be a little bit different because he will also have some good off-season time and preseason games and whatnot. But I think it'll take him a little bit of time to really work his way up. Not super long. I think he'll, if you're drafting him, don't expect him to come, right out the gates with what he's going to be with, for week 1 and 2. But as we go further into the season, I think he will assume that number 2 role. While that's happening, I think Lazard, when he's healthy, he does fit well into a wide receiver 2 role. If he played, he was not the leader in targets last year, but if he had played a full season, he would have been on track, or not, sorry, the leader in second targets. But if he had played a full season last year, he would have been the second leader in targets from a receiving perspective. So when you look at that, he had an excellent catch rate, 72%. Versus MVS, who we know doesn't have as high of a catch rate percentage. So Lazard is just a more dependable player, and he can fit well and hold that number 2 position until Amari Rodgers kind of takes that lead. But ultimately, I think it will be Rodgers.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that you made about Amari Rodgers having that slot role to himself. I mean, Alan Lazard and MVS are not going into the slot. I mean, we've seen them put Devontae Adams in there a lot, but Amari Rodgers, that's going to be his role, and he's been somebody that's been likened to Randall Cobb, who is somebody that thrived in that role with Aaron Rodgers previously. So I think that's going to be key, right? I think Aaron Rodgers is going to have to really be the guy that he's if Jordan Love's here, there's no way I'm looking to Amari Rodgers. But if Aaron Rodgers is here, I know that guy is going to unlock Amari Rodgers, and especially with some of the stuff that they can do. I mean, he's a guy that was pegged as having the versatility to be able to play running back as well. So you look at this Packers roster, and I don't really know. I just I said the same thing with we talked about the Washington football team a few weeks back, and we're saying thing with Curtis Samuel. Whereas if Aaron Jones goes down, right, like Amari Rodgers is probably going to end up getting some carries here. So, at least be involved in the run game. So I think that's an added plus. But like you said, his role may not be there right away. He's a guy that you're probably going to have to be checking the snap numbers on. Is he trending up? Are the targets getting there? Is he getting more opportunities? And then you kind of just sit him on your bench and kind of wait for that breakout game, so you don't have to spend that fab, be a week early. But Tara, let's move on to the tight end position, and starts with Robert Tonyan, pretty much starts and ends with Robert Tonyan. Came seemingly out of nowhere, but he was on the radar here at the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast. Was my tight end stream of the week, his 3 touchdown performance against Atlanta, which it was like his coming out party in terms of fantasy. But Tonyan was a factor all year for the Packers. Was fourth on the team in targets with 59. Caught 52 of those targets for 586 yards and 11 touchdowns. So he was very efficient. He was the tight end 4 in terms of total fantasy points. Was the tight end 7 in fantasy points per game, averaging just over 11 PPR points. Tonyan's going off the board as the tight end 10. Tara, do you believe that Tonyan can repeat his performance from last year?
Ooh, so it's risky. Because the problem is that while he was excellent from a touchdown perspective, the low yardage is a concern. And so that means, you got to be comfortable with the fact that, he's a boom or bust player. He will blink you. So there is that factor. Maybe it goes up a little bit. The only concern that I have is that we did re-sign Mercedes Lewis, who does not actually catch the ball very much, literally sees like one target, maybe two on a special day. But besides that, he does have a moderate snap percentage. So from that perspective, it could make you just a little bit wary of the fact that maybe his yardage and time on the field won't increase that dramatically. But like you said, when he's given the opportunity, he's been excellent and been a very reliable target. I mean, the catch rate was just fantastic. So there's no reason to believe that he can't relatively repeat what he did last year. The touchdown pace, remember that he did technically play in all 16 games, even if he didn't have a high snap percentage in all of them. So there might be a little bit of regression if you kind of extrapolate it out, but he's still going to be a go-to target if Rodgers is playing. And maybe, in the event that Jordan Love actually does end up being the guy, Tunyon's very reliable. Maybe he's someone that can be a nice little safety blanket, someone dependable for Love. But assuming that Rodgers is going to be playing, he's still going to be a great look. And he's going to be someone that's a great red zone target. You're just not going to see a huge ton of yardage. But in terms of where he is actually being drafted, I think 10's perfect for him. I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't reach any higher, but once you get to that level where you're waiting a little bit longer in the draft to get your tight end and taking a guy like Tunyon who can get you some very nice boom games and then kind of, covering yourself for those bust opportunities. But I like him a lot in redraft.
Yeah, I like Tunyon. I mean, he was a guy that, you saw that he has a good relationship with George Kittle. And I guess I forget what the relationship stems from. No, they didn't go to school together, but I think they just trained together in the off season. One of the things about Tunyon, because I like I said, he was a guy that I liked, at the beginning of last year. One of the things I remember about Tunyon is that he got injured, and I'm looking at the schedule now. It was week 8 against San Francisco. I think he had a high ankle sprain. He continued to play, played through that high ankle sprain. But one of the things I thought was interesting was prior to that high ankle sprain, he was averaging over 13 yards per reception. From the high ankle sprain in week 8 all the way through week 17, he was averaging 9.5 yards per reception. So I don't know, maybe that has something to do with it. You definitely, I said this the other day on a show. We always remember when guys don't play. Like, we always remember the guy we drafted, Christian McCaffrey, #1, and he missed all those games. But we don't remember about the guys that got injured and they did play, right? They continued to play through it. We don't think about that. We just think, oh, he's playing, he's healthy, but he's not healthy. He's just playing to, because he wants his teammates to think that they can count on him. And he's a football player. That's part of what he does. But he may not be 100% effective. So one of the things to maybe think about when you're looking at Tunyon here late in your drafts.
Exactly. And, and the ADP is a big thing in it. And that's why I mentioned that, redraft is great. When you look at Dynasty and the trade value, I wouldn't recommend, trying to trade for him just because we know the value that he can provide. So no one's going to be giving him up for anything that is less than reasonable. So, but from a redraft perspective, he's just a really great opportunity. He's something like, I don't see any reason that he shouldn't continue to be a high targeted red zone option.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking about Irv Smith previously with Kane Fossil, Devi_Kane. And we talked about Irv Smith, who's going off the board as tight end 11. So one spot here after Tunyon. Give me Tunyon. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, no Aaron Rodgers. I don't know. Give me Tunyon. I think no matter what, he'll probably be involved, especially down by the red zone, like you mentioned. Tara, this has been awesome. This has been a lot of fun. But before I let you go, I got to ask you one more question. It's been a staple here on the series, so I have to ask you. I feel like I know the answer already, but I'm going to ask anyway. Who is winning this division? How is it breaking down? Where are the Packers finishing?
Yeah, so I'm definitely saying that the Packers are winning the division, for sure. And after that is where it gets interesting, honestly. So we know Packers at the top, we know Detroit at the bottom. That middle ground is really interesting, and from a football fan perspective of the Packers, I was not happy to see Justin Fields drafted to Chicago. But from football overall, I mean, just how fantastic was that for them? I mean,
Yeah.
the pick of the draft, just really incredible. And I know Matt Nagy can say all he wants, but I see no reason that Justin Fields shouldn't be starting off the season. And or at the very least, he's got to come in there at some point. But it just makes sense to go ahead, and he's NFL ready to me. So if he gets in there, and with the combination of Chicago's defense, and I like David Montgomery a lot too. So between Chicago and Minnesota is where it gets a little fuzzy. Minnesota did well in terms of adding good depth pieces, but if Justin Fields comes out there with the combination of that defense that they've got, they could arguably make a push for finishing second place.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely got the Packers winning this thing. Especially if, I mean, that's assuming Rodgers is coming back. I'm willing to say that it's June 29th. A lot of things can happen between now and then, but I'm willing to say that. Yeah, and then I think it's a two-horse race to finish second between Minnesota and Chicago. Like you said, Chicago, I like the talent that they have in Justin Fields, especially, and when you add especially the other players on the roster combined with that defense, I think that gives them an opportunity there. But I'm still giving the slight edge to Minnesota. But we'll see. We'll see. Tara, thank you for coming on. Let's where can everybody find you? Where can everybody find your work and what you got working on these days?
Best place to find me is on Twitter. My handle is It's Tera Time. That's Tera with an E. Thank you, mom and dad. But It's Tera Time is where you can find me, and all of my content right now is on the Dynasty Vipers YouTube channel. I've got a series going on right now. That's a playlist in there. It's Tera Time, 30 players in 30 days, and it's going really well. I'm on like day maybe 22 or 23. And you can see it's about clips that are about anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes, going one ahead. There's 30 players that I think are good depth or risk picks for Dynasty. And so you can find me on there. And of course, our regular series that we do with the Dynasty Vipers, the Behind the Grind series, is going really well. We've had a lot of really great guests recently. And going forward, we have a lot of great guests stacked up as well. So if anyone is interested in that, that is where you can find me and the Vipers. And, I just really appreciate all the support that everyone's given.
Yeah, definitely have checked out some of those videos. They've been absolutely phenomenal, and you've done a great job. Like I said, budding star in the community, and so I was glad to be able to get you on here tonight, Tara. And so definitely appreciate it. And make sure you go check Tara out and all her work with the Dynasty Vipers podcast and YouTube channel. And everyone, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will catch y'all later. Peace.